Today we begin the final chapter of the Jephthah story, and we look at 3 minor judges. But before we do all that, let me go ahead and open us with some prayer. Most gracious and loving God, we thank you for all that you do for us. Watch over us today, watch over our minds, watch over our spirits. Give us wisdom and understanding so that we can understand your word and how we can apply it into our lives today. How can we make sense of some of these very difficult stories? Watch over us, lead us, guide us, and give us insight. In all of this, we ask and we pray in your Son's name, Jesus. Amen. So as we begin our lesson today, we see that the Jephthah story continues, and we have that final scene of Jephthah. But what we also see here is the first civil war. This is the first conflict inside the tribes. And so let's just go ahead and begin the lesson then. This is Judges chapter 12, beginning with verse 1. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us out to go with you? We will burn your house down over you." Jephthah said to them, "My people and I were engaged in conflict with the Ammonites, who oppressed us severely. But when I called you, you did not deliver me from their hand. When I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim, because they said, "You are fugitives from Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the heart of Ephraim and Manasseh." Then the Gileadites took the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. Whenever one of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said, "No," they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he said, "Sibboleth," for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell at that time. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in his town in Gilead. As we begin the 3rd chapter of the story of Jephthah, we see a very similar scene that had happened back in chapter 8 of Judges with Gideon. Gideon is confronted by the Ephraimites in that story for not including them in a battle, for not calling them up so that they could join in the conflict. In fact, what we see is almost an identical story in a lot of ways up to this point. The Ephraimites come to Jephthah and ask him why you didn't call us out. And just like in the Gideon story. In the Gideon story, though, the calling out of the Ephraimites, they had refused to come. They had failed to come. In this story, we don't really see the point where Jephthah called them up. Maybe he did and it wasn't recorded, or maybe he is just telling them that, well, we called you and you didn't come. But however it turns out, again, the Ephraimites feel left out. The tribe of Ephraim feels like that they are the senior tribe. They are the leader tribe of all of the northern kingdom, or the northern territories. And in fact, they even feel like they have that power over Judah. Even though Judah is a much stronger and much more intact community of people, a tribe that have incorporated Simon and parts of Benjamin. As we will see as we move forward, we find that Benjamin oftentimes is kind of a dividing factor between the north and the south. Benjamin kind of sits in between the two. And Benjamin, the youngest child of Jacob, holds a position in the kingdom or in the among the tribes as being kind of one that goes in both directions. Sometimes he sides with the northern tribes, and sometimes he sides with Judah and Simeon, which has been assimilated into Judah. So as we move forward here, we see that the Ephraimites are mad because, again, they've been left out of the plunder, they've been left out of the honors, and so there is the idea that the Ephraimites don't get part of the booty, the plunder that happens whenever they conquer another peoples and they, destroy their city and they take everything. The Ephraimites are left out of all of that plunder. The other part of that is the idea that Ephraim wasn't called up, and so there is that honor-shame concept also, that they feel like they've been shamed or neglected or abused because they haven't been called to assist along with the other brothers or the rest of the tribes. And so there is again that a Gilead, because if you remember also that Gideon was also from Gilead. And Gilead is a refugee tribe or a refugee clan. The people who settled in Gilead are refugees from Ephraim and Manasseh. And so part of this is part of the story also is the same as with Gideon, only it's even stronger with Jephthah. Remember, Jephthah is the son of a prostitute. He is an illegitimate son and was cast out by his people, and he had to go off to the land of Tob, a whole different place where he gathered himself a group of mercenaries. And then they call him back and say, you're part of us, won't you come and help us defeat the enemies? And of course he says, well, I'll do that, but you got to make me your chief. And they agree to that. And so that's kind of how the Jephthah story evolves, is he's an outcast. But all of Gilead is an outcast. They were refugees from their own land. And so, and that comes out in this also. That's later as part of the reason why this that the Ephraimites have actually insulted the Gileadites to the point where this war was inevitable. This conflict was bound to happen. In fact, it seems like the Ephraimites came with the idea of a conflict. They, their question is not, the way they question Jephthah, the way they challenge him, is actually in the Hebrew. It's different, a little bit different than the way they challenge Gideon, in that this is much more hostile, much more directly hostile toward Jephthah and his people, his warriors, who the Gileadites, or who they're really from Ephraim, but they are, again, they're fugitive. They're refugees from Ephraim. And so Ephraim feels like, okay, not only did you leave us out, but you are an illegitimate leader, and you left us out. And so there's an added tension there. And so they ask him, why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and didn't call us up to go with you? And again, there's the way the question is worded, the way it's structured, it's a much more hostile question, in that Ephraim is actually challenging Jephthah for leadership. Gilead has turned out to be the leader tribe, or the leader clan at the moment, and has taken over as the leadership position. Remember, everybody offered him up. Everybody except Ephraim offered him the chief's position, the high chief. One of the things we need to recognize as we're moving forward through these stories is that as each progression of judge comes along, it is closer and closer and closer to acting like a king. That the judge becomes more and more king-like in their activities. And we'll see that as we move forward. We should be already seeing it, but you should already be seeing it, and we will see more of it as we move forward. Well, again, the Ephraim is not coming to Jephthah peacefully asking him, hey, how come you didn't, include us? They're coming in, how come you didn't include us? In fact, I'm so mad at you, we're going to burn your house down. They said, we will burn your house down over you because you didn't call us up. And so they come with a hostile attitude toward Jephthah. And Jephthah replies to them that we in Gilead, and again he's separating himself in a lot of ways. He is separating himself from Ephraim, even though if you trace them back they are Ephraimites. But they have been now separated away, and they're a whole different clan, and they're not even recognized anymore pretty much by Ephraim as being part of them. In fact, they're called fugitives. So Jephthah goes in defense of his position here, of what he's done, and he says, you know, we were being oppressed by the Ammonites who oppressed us severely. And I want you to know that it is that phrase there, where they oppressed us severely, is not found in all of the texts, all of the manuscripts from the past. And most of the most reliable actually leave that out. That they were, that the Ammonites, they were engaged in a conflict with the Ammonites, but they weren't being oppressed. And but here in the version that we have in the modern translation, they include that because it is in a lot of the manuscripts, but not in all of them. So anyway, so he goes on and says, we were being attacked. And we were already in a conflict with these people. And when we called you to come to us, and again, we don't hear that, we don't see that anywhere in the story where Jephthah made a call to the Ephraimites, but he claims he did, and that they didn't respond, that they didn't come. And that's exactly the same, almost identical in storyline to the Gideon story back in chapter 8. These two stories kind of really do mesh with each other very well. He says that, well, when I looked and I saw you weren't coming to help, when you weren't coming to defend us and to help us deliver, to help deliver us from all of this, man, I took it into my own hands. I took our lives, us and the Gileadites, into our own hands to protect ourselves. We took our own life into our own hands, and we crossed over the Jordan into the Ammonite territory, and Adonai gave them into our hands. And so who are you to come and argue with us about this? Why then have you come up to this day against me to fight against me? Why have you come here? Not only did we push them out and win our fight, but God was with us in all of this. And so who are you to come and tell us this? So Jephthah, out of anger, because of the confrontation here, he gathers up his men, he gathers up the army of Gilead, and they go and fight against the Ephraimite tribe, the people of Ephraim. Well, they win. Remember, all this time here, although Jephthah is not a great character, he doesn't have a pure heart, he's not completely devoted to God, God has put his spirit in him to win. And so he defeats Ephraim. And he defeats them mostly out of the insult that came after this, what we just now hear. You are fugitives from Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the heart of Ephraim and Manasseh. Again, the Ephraim then pretty much tells them that you are you are part of us, and yet you are not. You are not honorable because of your heritage, because of where you came from, that you are fugitives, that you all had to leave us. So as the battle goes forward, so that was the insult, is that you are Ephraimites, but you are fugitives from Ephraim, you are outcasts from Ephraim, you are not worthy of Ephraim, is the insult that they're given. Well, as the battle continues, they finally defeat them on the other side of the Jordan, and Ephraim starts to tries to leave the battle. And the Gileadites get ahead of them, and they block off the passage between the west and the east, leading back, or from the east and the west, leading back into the tribal lands of Ephraim. And so the battle is on, and the Gileadites go and they capture the fords, or they take the fords at the crossing of the Jordan. And again, this is very similar to a previous conflict. This point of the Jordan, where they keep doing, where this scene happens, We see also an identical, not identical way it's dealt with, but again, this crossing of the Jordan right here at this spot happens also in chapter 3, and it happens in chapter 7. And each time that crossing takes, where they're going from the east to the west back into the Promised Land, each time that crossing of the Jordan becomes more and more challenging, more and more of a low point of the tribal status, or the tribal the tribe's existence starts becoming more and more troubled, and it's reflected in the leadership. Ephraim wants to be the leader tribe, and yet they do they don't live into the challenge each time. Each time Ephraim is given the leadership, they fail in their leadership. And each time someone rises up as the judge, and they're made into kind of the king, which is again what has happened here with Jephthah. They've made him the chief of chiefs. Is that they fail. They honestly don't live into what they're supposed to be. So anyway, the Gileadites take the fords at the Jordan there against the Ephraimites, and they set up a test. The word shibboleth has actually moved into the English language. It's part of the idea is it's a test for your rightness of being. And in this case here, whenever an Ephraimite or one of the fugitives, now, in fact, the wording here is kind of a mock of the earlier wording use of this, where Ephraim is calling the Gileadites fugitives from Ephraim. Here we have that same word, the fugitives of Ephraim are those now that have lost their battle, and they're trying to get back to their home. They're trying to get back to Ephraim, and they're called fugitives of Ephraim. Well, each one of these men, and again, this is a mocking statement. This is to poke at that previous argument that the Ephraimites used, that these people are now the fugitives. So whenever one of these Ephraimite fugitives would come up to the crossing, maybe they were in groups or whatever, whenever they would come there, the Gileadites would ask them, are you an Ephraimite? And of course, if they said no, they would give them this shibboleth test. And what they would ask them is, well, then say shibboleth. And the shift in the dialect between the tribes is starting to show. And we find out that Ephraim, the people of Ephraim, say this word differently. The word shibboleth means flowing streams. And so if the person can say that word correctly and use that sh instead of that s sound, then they would be able to cross over because they were not from Ephraim. So as this goes on, are you an Ephraimite? They say no. Then say shibboleth. The person, if they're an Ephraimite, they would say sibboleth instead because they couldn't pronounce it right. According to the Gileadites, they couldn't pronounce this word correctly. They couldn't pronounce it right. Well, they would kill that person. And again, these were probably fugitives. These were, men who were coming up to this checkpoint in singulars and in pairs and in trios and probably in small groups. It ends up that 42,000 Ephraimites were killed on that day at this battle. Now, whether that 42,000 were killed there at the river because they weren't able to say shibboleth, or whether this is a total battle dead of the Ephraimites from this conflict, and that's what I'm going to look at, is I'm kind of seeing that this is the total amount of Ephraimites who fell on that day were 42,000. I know we've had a question a few times about the numbers here in their reality. And again, we have no idea what the reality of the numbers are. And yet 42,000 in those days were not unusual. We see battles, we see recordings of battles from other cultures in the region. We see these on pillars, on stiles, on walls, on all kinds of different writing styles and places in the region of the world, in this area of the world where civilization began, we see all kinds of stories about these kinds of battles where thousands and thousands of tens of thousands are killed. And so I'm going to kind of look at these numbers as being relatively realistic for the time. They may not be accurate because 42 is divisible by 7. And so it could be that this is one of those magic numbers because it is divisible by 7. But it also could be a real number, as in there were 42,000 that fell. There were 60,000 who fought and 42,000 fell, and so many went home. But we have no a basis of comparison for reality other than these other cultures that have written out things like this. Well, at the end of this section here, the last of Jephthah's life, Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in his town in Gilead. Now, he was not born in the town of Gilead. He was born in the region of Gilead, and he was actually probably buried in his original hometown. What we need to note here is that when he judged Israel for 6 years, it doesn't say at the end of that where they had rest. All the previous judges to this point, these major judges would be, and the people had rest. There wasn't any of that mentioned here. There is no rest for this. And so that's just, we need to recognize that maybe hostilities, maybe conflict has continued all the way up to this point. That there's still this rumbling of hostility in the background. Kitten almost fell off the table. Well, he dies and he's buried. And picking up now with verse 8. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons. He gave his 30 daughters in marriage outside his clan, and brought in 30 young women from outside for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. Okay, so we meet the next judge. This is one of the first of the 3 minor judges here at the end of chapter 12. I want you to note here that if you were to go back between Gideon and Jephthah, there were 2 minor judges. Now here there are 3 minor judges. And between Deborah, Balak, and the Gideon story, there was 1 judge. So we have 1 minor judge, and then 2 minor judges. Now there are 3 minor judges. So far, with the exception of the first judge, which was from Judah, all of the other judges have been from the other tribes, from the northern tribes. And there have been from Zebulun, they've been from Ephraim, they've been from Manasseh, they've been from Gad, I think was one of them. But anyway, they're all from up in the northern territories with the exception of the first judge. So this Bethlehem is not the Bethlehem. And again, it depends on which scholar you read from, but most, if not, I'm going to say 90% of all of the scholarship that I read on this subject, on this topic, places this Bethlehem in the tribe of Zebulun, right on the border between Zebulun and Asher. Not the Bethlehem that is down in Judah, right next to Jerusalem. This is a totally different, this is the one up in north. And remember, Bethlehem just means the house of bread. And so this is not this is a place where, this is the Bethlehem, this is the house of bread in the north, instead of the house of bread in the south. So he is from the tribe of Zebulun, up in the Bethlehem of the tribe of Zebulun. And what we need to recognize too is that we had, if you remember going back, we had Gideon had 40 sons who judged 40 towns. Here we have Ibzan. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gives his 30 daughters in marriage to clans outside of his own. And he takes daughters from those clans outside of his own and brings them to marry his sons. So he marries out his daughters to the other clans and marries daughters from those other clans into his own family. This would, well, first off, one of the things it does is it will dilute the Zebulun tribe from being more Zebulun, and so it starts to blend the northern tribes together into less tribes and more into different kinds of groupings. But the important part of this actually is the fact that he's marrying daughters out to clan leaders of other clans, of other tribes, and bringing daughters in to marry them into his own sons. So what he's doing, that's something that kings do. This is not something that the judges do. This is something that kings do. And so in some senses, we're seeing the beginning of kingdom, the beginning of the idea that they're moving toward becoming a kingdom. It's a slow progression. We see this a very slow progression, but it is moving forward. I want you to note also here that when Ibzan dies, again, he's buried in his hometown, but when Ibzan dies, again, there is still and the people had rest. We also note here that God isn't in the story. He doesn't bless him. He doesn't fill his life. This is a minor judge. He's just kind of a space filler. He only lives as the judge of this particular tribe, this particular clan, or of the territory here in the north for 7 years. And then he dies and is buried. And again, no peace, no rest. The next one lifts up. Verse 11. After him Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried in Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. So once again, we see that another Zebulunite, another one from the tribe of Zebulun, is the judge, and his name is Elon. And he judges the tribes for 10 years. And he dies, and he's buried in Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. Really not too much about him. He reigned for 10 years. There didn't seem to be rest again when he dies. And it doesn't say too much about his children or anything else. He's just, he was there, he died, or he lived, he was the chief, and then he died. Beginning with verse 13. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, son of Hillel the Pirathonite, died, and was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. So the next judge here is Elon, which means little servant, and his father's name is Hillel, which means he praised. So he is a Pirathonite, which actually means he's from Ephraim. So he's an Ephraimite. He's from the tribe of Ephraim. He's from the clan of Pirathon. And he judged Israel. He had, and again, we need to see this in the context of kingship. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. So, just like Gideon, who had, I think I said 40 earlier, I believe if I were to go back and look at it, he actually had 70 sons who rode on 70 donkeys, or is it 40 sons on 40 donkeys? I don't remember. We'll have to go back and look. But it is interesting again that what we see here is, well, one of the things we note is that Jephthah, the first, this cycle of judges, the first in this cycle, Jephthah, does not have any children. There are no sons of Jephthah. Ibzan, the next one in the line here, he has 30 sons, and so that's good. The next one, they don't mention any sons, and the next one he dies. And then here we have Abdon, who has 40 sons and 30 grandsons, which makes up the number 70. and they ride on 70 donkeys. Again, this is like, go back to Gideon and his children, his sons. They were riding on donkeys. Riding on a donkey, and again, here is that one of those kingship motifs, those ideas about kingship, is that riding on a donkey suggests that he had a lot of wealth, and also not only did he have a lot of wealth, but this is again a sign of kingship, riding on a donkey. One of the other interesting parts about this is that because of the large number of children, just like if we go back to Ibzan, here we have Abdon with just a huge number of children. The idea here is that if they have that many children, it means that they have lots of wives, which is again the idea of having a harem. And so if you have lots of children, you most likely, if you have 40 children, then you have a harem, and kings have harems. And again, here are examples where the tribes are slowly shifting toward kingdom, raising up a king, and yet it is still short of that, because all of the tribes will not accept this. Well, anyway, he's a judge for Israel for 8 years. He dies, and he's buried in Ephraim, in his hometown, which is in the hill country of the Amalekites. It's interesting also, just as a side note here, that Dan at one time owned part of this territory. But things got so rough for them that they migrated and landed and ended up being much further north. In fact, that's where the phrase "from Dan to Beersheba" comes from. Was the idea is they moved all the way into the northern part of the territories, and that's just kind of a little interesting side note. One of the other side notes to the story, or to the structure of Judges up to this point, also is this is our 6th minor judge. And our next story begins the Samson cycle. And with the Samson cycle, we have our last and 6th major judge. So we have 6 major judges and 6 minor judges, altogether 12 judges. One of those interesting numbers in the Hebrew Hebrew culture. Okay. Moving on now, we will look at the next cycle of story, and the next cycle of story begins the Samson saga, and we will begin that in just a moment. As we begin this next cycle of stories, this is the Samson story. This is the beginning of the Samson story. Samson is a tragic character. At the same time, Samson is also a superhero in a lot of ways. The concept of superhero is not new in our stories. If we were to go back to Genesis, we see that Jacob is a superhero in a sense. When he comes to the well, where he meets, when he comes to the well where Rachel is, and where Rachel and Leah are coming with their flocks because they're shepherdesses, Jacob is there, and normally the women shepherdesses would have to wait because there are other shepherds. These are male shepherds that will be bringing their flocks along. And the stone that sits over the well is so heavy that it can't be moved by a single person. It takes several men to move this thing. This moving of the stone is also beyond the capacity of the 2 women. And so Jacob in that story acts as he has incredible strength. That's the trait of a superhero. He's got incredible strength. He's able to move that stone off without any assistance. And so that is kind of a superhero story where he does something really above the norm. And we have that all through the story of Samson. Samson is one of the first superheroes, and he has incredible strength, he has incredible power, he has incredible charisma, he has all of the traits of a superhero. But he's also a tragic character. And so let's move into the story of Samson, beginning with his birth. This is Judges chapter 13, beginning with verse 1. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. So as our story begins, we find that Israel has not moved anywhere toward God. They're still doing what they want. It doesn't tell us what the evil is in the sight of the Lord, but I can only imagine it's probably exactly the same problem that they've had in the past. They've got Baal worship, they've got Shamash worship, they've got Molech worship, they've got, in fact, at this point here, this is probably Molech that they are, that they have moved toward. So they've got Shamash and Molech and Baal and Asherah and, all of these different gods. And again, it seems like that's probably the way they've gone. As we move through the story, we see that, well, one of the other little notes we need to make is every time that a foreign power has come in and oppressed them in the book of Judges, it's because that is the God that the people have turned to. So when they were fighting the Ammonites, it's because they had taken on Shamash as a god. When they were fighting the Amalekites or one of the other tribes that are part of the Canaanite groups, the god was Baal or Asherah, or Baal and Asherah. So what happens is that God uses the people of that particular god to oppress the Israelites because that is the God that they're following. And so there's a kind of a correlation between what God is involved and who the oppressor is. Again, in this case, as we move into the Samson story, we will find out who the oppressor is, and the oppressor will tell us who the God is that is involved in the story. Well, God is upset with them again, and he creates the new enemy of the Philistines. He brings the Philistines in the story. So, in order to find out who is going to, again, once we find out who is the oppressor, we now can figure out who the God is. We won't find that out today, but we will find it out before the end of the Samson story. We'll find out who the God of the Philistines is. Picking up now with verse 2. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was barren, having borne no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Although you are barren, having borne no children, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, or to eat anything unclean, for you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor is to come on his head, for the boy shall be a Nazirite to God from birth. It is he who shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Then the woman came and told her husband, A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like that of an angel of God, most awe-inspiring. I did not ask him where he came from, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, You shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for the boy shall be a Nazirite to God, from birth to the day of his death. So we meet a certain man from the town of Zorah, and he's from the tribe of the Danites, and his name is Manoah. Zorah is, in fact, there's some interesting things that happen in Zorah. It's in the Sorek Valley, and a later story placed right here in the Sorek Valley has also Philistines in it. This is where David defeats Goliath. Is in the valley of Sorek, which is where the town of Zorah is located. And so this little valley here plays a significant role in a later story. But here, we also need to recognize that Samson also displays a lot of characteristics of other judges and also of future kings. There is a similarity between these two. We also hear his wife is barren. I want you to note his wife does not have a name. His wife is never named. The woman, the mother of Samson, is never named in the story. And so that's just kind of, she's not named. And she plays a very significant role in this part of the story, and yet she is not named. Only the husband, the father of Samson is named. And the tragedy of her life is now brought out by this angel. The angel appears to her. We are given the tragedy of her life that she was barren and she has never borne any children. She's never had any children. And so then an angel of the Lord appears to her and tells her a story. Again, we see this idea here that God appearing and expressing what's going to happen, or even proclaiming the birth of a child, is not unusual. This kind of thing happens a few times in our. We have the same thing happen with Hannah, who is the mother of Samuel. We also have this with Mary, the mother of Jesus, that an angel appears and says, I know you are barren, but we're going to fix that and you're going to have a child. And so the angel appears to her and tells her, you are barren, and you have borne no children, and yet you will conceive and bear a son. So you have been barren, you have not produced any children, I'm going to make you fertile, and you will have a son. But then she's given instruction. And the instruction is that she is to be very careful, that she is not to drink any wine or strong drink or to eat anything unclean. These are instructions given to her. She is not to have any alcohol. She's not to have any wine. Now, it's very explicit. It says wine and strong drink. That would be wine or any distilled spirits, and these people did know how to distill spirits. There's evidence of that, and so there's no alcohol at all, including wine, for her. And she is supposed to be very careful about making sure that she doesn't make herself unclean. So she's not supposed to touch any dead bodies or eat anything unclean. She is supposed to follow the cleanliness rules, she's supposed to follow the rules about how to stay clean. And then it goes on that she's going to have a child. And this child that she's going to have, there are rules for him that for his life, his entire life, he is going to be a Nazirite. He's going to be dedicated to God. That's what Nazirite means, a dedication. It's a dedication to God. It's normal. What's interesting is that Nazirite is normally not a lifetime thing. It is for a very specific period of time. It'd be like, okay, for 6 months, I'm going to live this very ascetic life. I'm going to not cut my hair. I'm not going to trim my beard. I'm not going to cut my hair. I'm going to not drink wine or have vinegar or wine, any wine products or any spirits at all. Even beer is off limits. And I am to ingest nothing unclean. I'm never to touch a dead body during this period of time or to touch anything unclean. That is the vow of a Nazirite, and normally it is only for a period of time. There is a strong belief that that Paul describes him coming out of a Nazirite vow because he has his hair cut. There is a story about Paul that kind of reflects this. And so there's a strong belief that at one time Paul made himself a Nazirite vow. Well, she is to make this vow for her son, that he is dedicated to God for the rest of his life, and that there are, again, 3 things he is never to do. He's never to cut his hair. He is never to drink wine or spirits, and he is never to touch something unclean, never to touch a dead body. Those are kind of the rules of being a Nazirite. And he is from birth to be that. In fact, he's to be that before birth, while he's in his mother's womb. She is not to have any alcohol. She is not to touch anything unclean. She is not to cut her hair. She is not to do any of those things. She is to live as a Nazirite until this child is born, so that even while he is in the womb, he's living the life of a Nazirite. And he's given a proclamation, and she is given instruction that he is to be like this because he will begin, not deliver into entirety, but to begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. As we move forward in our progression of time, we move out of the time of the judges. We have the little story of Ruth, which is kind of during the period of the judges, and so that really doesn't count. But then we have the story as it moves forward. They move out of the judges period into the Samuel period, the first of the prophets, the first of the major prophets, and he's also acting as a judge. And so that's kind of the transition moving on into kingship here. And during that entire time, who is Saul? Who are they in conflict with all of this time? All the way up through David's time they're in conflict with the Philistines. And so Samson is not the deliverance of the Philistines, but he is to begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Well, the wife of Manoah runs to her husband and tells her then that a man of God came to her, and his appearance was awesome. So he must have been an angel of God, because of his appearance. He was like that of an angel of God. It was very awe-inspiring. And I didn't ask him where he came from, and I didn't ask him what his name was. This is important. This is an important part of the little bit of a story, but it's also culturally important, is that she did not feel, because of who he was, his presence there. Normally the hospitable thing to do, the normal hospitality, is that you welcome them, you find out their name, you find out where they're from, you maybe even find out where they're going. You get a little bit of information from them. But she didn't do any of that. Instead, maybe it was because he was so awe-inspiring, because he was so maybe even frightening to her, that she didn't ask these questions. But he said to me, she says, that she shall conceive and bear a son, and that she was to no longer drink any wine or strong drink, he touched nothing unclean, and because this child that she's going to be is going to be a Nazirite, and which a Nazirite to God, a dedicated person to God, from the day of his birth to the day of his death. And so not only is his birth proclaimed here, but also his death is foretold. And so both his life and his death is foretold right here in this statement, and that whole period of time he is to live as a Nazirite. Verse 8. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O Lord, I pray, let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we are to do concerning the boy who will be born. God listened to Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But her husband Manoah was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. Manoah got up and followed his wife and came to the man and said to him, Are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. Then Manoah said, Now, when your words come true, what is to be the boy's rule of life? What is he to do? The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, Let the woman give heed to all that I have said to her. She may not eat of anything that comes from the vine. She is not to drink wine or strong drink or eat any unclean thing. She is to observe everything that I commanded her. So, Manoah then calls out and prays to God. He entreats Adonai and says, "Oh Adonai, I pray let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we are to do concerning the boy who will be born." This also is very important. They do not know anymore. They have lost their connection to Adonai and the rules that he set out. They have lost their connection to the commandments, to the Mosaic law, to what Moses had taught them. So Manoah and his wife, not knowing what to, how to do this, because they don't have the Mosaic law, they've lost their connection in that way. They ask, or Manoah asked God to let this man of God come back and teach us what we need to know, so that we will raise this child exactly like God wants. Well, God heard this and he listened to Manoah, and the angel of God comes back to the woman as she is out in the field. And we find out that Manoah is not with her. He's off somewhere else working. And she's here in this spot and he's off somewhere else working. And the angel of God appears back to her. She runs quickly, she runs to her husband, and she tells Manoah what's going on, and that the man of God who came to me the other day, he's back again, he's appeared again. And Manoah gets up and he follows his wife there. When he gets there, he asks the man, "Are you the man who came to, are you the man who spoke to this woman, my wife, here?" Again, the language here is so dismissive of the woman, the wife. And again, this is indicative of cultures that are, and this is true even today, cultures that are starting to fall into when they start being oppressive. When cultures start being oppressive, the first person to be usually oppressed in a society is the woman. And what we see here is the slow, as we move through the story. Remember, way back early in the stories, back early in Judges, we had Deborah, who was a judge, all on her own. Well, she was the prophet. She was a prophet, all on her own. That's a position of authority. And as we've moved through Judges, we've slowly seen the decline down to the daughter last week, or in the last lesson of Jephthah, his daughter being where he sacrifices his daughter. Now here we have the unnamed mother. This let the woman. All through this is, are you the one who came to this woman? This woman is all, without giving her any kind of name. And again, so the status of women is dropping lower and lower as we move through Judges. And this is indicative of a culture that is beginning to decline. A culture that's starting to disintegrate. First starts to disintegrate inside the household. And the woman is the first to be part of that discrimination, or that being made lesser in culture, or in the culture. So, are you the man who came? Are you the one who came to this woman here? And the angel said, "Well, I am." And I want you to note that answer. I am. This is straight from God. This is that I am statement. And so, are you the one who came? And the angel of God's response is, "I am." What's God's name? I am. So we have that, and I think that's just wonderful here that they've worked that into the story so that we know that we're talking to Adonai. Then Manoah again makes now a statement about this, that let your words come true. But what is, about what is to be the boy's rule of life? What is he to do? So the father now wants to know, how is he supposed to live? How is he supposed to be? Okay, you've answered to me how my wife is supposed to be, but now how is he supposed to be? What is he to do? Well, the angel then again speaks to the man, to Manoah, and says to him, "Let the woman give heed to all that I said to her. She may not eat of anything that comes from the vine. She is not to drink wine or strong drink or eat anything unclean. She is to observe everything that I commanded her." She has all the responsibility. She has all of the work to do. She has everything is dependent on her actions. And yet, she is the unnamed woman in the story. That shows us the decline. It further shows us the decline. And how what she is to do, and how everything depends on her actions. Manoah is not asked to do anything other than provide the seed. He's not asked to do anything in this story. Verse 15. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Allow us to detain you and prepare a kid for you." The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "If you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you want to prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know that he was an angel of the Lord. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, so that we may honor you when your words come true?" But the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask my name? It is too wonderful." So Manoah has been given instruction, Manoah has been given the information about the woman, what the woman is to do. And so now Manoah says, "Well, let me hold you here and let me prepare a meal for you. Let me prepare a kid, a young goat for you." Well, the angel of the Lord, and all through this is how the man is described, as the angel of the Lord, the angel of Adonai. And so the angel of the I Am said to Manoah, "If you detain me, if you hold me here, I still will not eat your food." Now, Manoah is trying to turn this into the hospitality moment here, where you ask the name, invite them to a meal, you find out their name, you find out where they're going, where they came from, what their history is a little bit. You engage in them. And the angel says that, "Well, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not going to eat it. If you want to go ahead and prepare all of this, prepare it as a burnt offering and offer it up to Adonai." And here is where we find out that Manoah did not know that this was an angel of Adonai. He knew it was an angel, but he didn't know what God. He didn't know which God this being came from. And we find that out right here. That Manoah did not know that this was an angel from the I Am. Even though the angel told him that I am. Then, Manoah says then to the angel, "Well, what is your name?" And again, he's trying to figure out, he's trying to find out that hospitality bit. He's trying to move into this. What is your name? And the idea now is he's putting out there that if you tell me your name, that way when we make this offering up to, when we make this up, that we can honor you, and then once Samson is born, that we can also, honor you in this. We'll name you the Godfather, the godparent of this child. We'll honor you in some way when your words come true. The angel's response is, "Why are you asking my name?" If that isn't kind of right out of the Jacob crossing the Jabbok story, I don't know what is. Why do you ask my name? And then then the angel again responds with, "It is too wonderful. My name is too wonderful for you to understand. It is too great for you to understand." I've already told, and in reality, he's already told him his name. His name is I Am. But even that is too wonderful for Manoah to understand, and so his name is just too powerful, too strong for him to conceive it. Verse 19. So Manoah took the kid with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, to him who works wonders. When the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar while Manoah and his wife looked on, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel of the Lord did not appear again to Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." But his wife said to him, "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering at our hands, or shown us all these things, or now announced to us such things as these." So Manoah takes that young goat, and along with a grain offering, and he lays it up on a rock as an altar. And this was a rock that was already dedicated to the Lord. This was I remind you that an altar to God cannot be made out of dressed stone. It must be made out of raw stone, unworked stone. And so that's what this is. This is an unworked stone that has already been dedicated to Adonai, and or at least it's been dedicated to gods. It's been set aside as an altar for sacrifice. And so he takes this sacrifice and he puts it there on the rock, and I think it's wonderful. It says, "To him who works wonders," to that God that does wonderful things. They're making this offering. Well, once they set it on fire and the flames start going up toward heaven from the altar, and they see the angel of Adonai ascending in the flame, going up in the flame of the altar while they look on. It didn't come down from heaven into the flame, but it goes from the flame moving up. Here's that angel of God standing here, and they make the altar, and all of a sudden he's kind of sucked into the flame and ascends back up into heaven. And while they're watching this happen, and the angel again does not appear to them again, ever. Well, they both Manoah realized that this was an angel of Adonai. And so he tells his wife, "Oh my goodness, we're going to die, because we have seen God. We have seen the I Am." But his wife, and again, this is the second time that I can very clearly see that the woman in this sees more clearly, with much more wisdom than the man. He is, we're going to die because we have seen the face of Adonai. We've seen the face of the I Am. And his wife, in her wisdom, says, if Adonai had meant to kill us, he would not have taken our burnt offering and grain offerings from our hands. He wouldn't have done that. Or if God was going to kill us, then also he wouldn't have shown us what we needed to know. He wouldn't have told us all this. He wouldn't have shown us all these things that we have seen, these wonders. And we would never have heard about any of this. He wouldn't have announced the birth of our child, this future son that we're going to have, if we had not, if God was going to kill us. One of the other little notes that you need to see in this is about the asking of the name and all of that. Part of that hospitality concept in this, in asking of the name, and this is the same thing that happened at the Jabbok. This is very similar to that. Give me your name. Is to move the person from being a stranger to being somebody that you know, somebody that you're more intimate with. The idea is to move them out of being a stranger to being somebody that you know. You know their name. And so part of that hospitality is to move. That's why they ask the name, "What is your name, stranger?" Because once you've given them your name, you're no longer a stranger, you're now somebody that they know. And so that's part of this hospitality concept also that I wanted you to know about. Verse 24. The woman bore a son and named him Samson. The boy grew, and the Lord blessed him. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahanadan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. So in our final segment today, we find the woman, again still unnamed, bears a son, and she names him Samson. Samson means little son, S-U-N, little son. He grows up, and God seems to bless him all of his life. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahanadan, in this little area. This is where, this is in his home his own territory. That word that we have here, the Mahanadan, means the camp of Dan. Mahana means camp, and Dan is the name of the place, and so it's the camp of Dan. This location is important. We need to recognize this location is important. It will reappear in the closing scenes from Judges in chapters 17 and 18. You'll see. We will see. We'll see more about this area. Well, that is our lesson for today. We began the Samson story. Next week we'll pick up with chapter 14. And in chapter 14 we will continue the story of Samson, and this will continue for a little while here, with his... well, we'll begin with his first marriage. Next week we'll begin with Samson's first marriage, and so I hope you look forward to that. I do, because I really do love the Samson stories as they begin, because they're so full of just some interesting things. So go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next week. God's peace be with you in all that you do. Amen.